More of Ladies Can We Talk with Debbie Georgatos, right here on 660 AM The Answer.
Welcome back to Ladies Can We Talk. Thanks so much for tuning in. We have one of our favorite and recurring guests with us this evening, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. Hello, sir.
Good to be with you, Debbie.
Although you need no introduction, I always feel like I want to give it. I want to mention to our listeners that Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, who did happily for us, now lives in Dallas, Texas with his family, and he is with the NCPA, the National Center for Policy Analysis, the executive director there. But what I want to focus in talking with him tonight is about America's foreign policy, and he's served. He was Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Army, in which he served from 1982 to 2004. He was actually in Operation Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom. So when we talk about military things, he knows what he's talking about.
A little bit.
Well, and I'm just so grateful for that, because I just feel like there's so many things going on in the world I want us to understand and know about. So I want to just jump right in. There's been a lot of discussion in America and actually in this presidential election cycle about the depletion of the U.S. military. And so it seems that they're talking about in personnel, in equipment, and even kind of in morale. So is this being exaggerated, or is it really a problem?
No, it's not being exaggerated. And so I can put it in the right context. The United States Army is at 1939 levels, pre-World War II. The United States Marine Corps is at World War I levels. The United States Navy, the smallest Navy in 100 years. Ronald Reagan had surface warship capability at about 530, 535, somewhere in there. Today we have 283 surface warships, going down to 230. Seas have not shrunk, from what I understand. We have the oldest and the smallest fleet since we created the modern United States Air Force. And if people want to verify what I'm talking about, just go back to the recent testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee by some of the senior leaders of the Army, Navy, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps, where the Marine Corps, who is supposedly our 911 force, Semper Fidelis, always out there on deployments, you had the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps saying that he does not know that if the Marine Corps were to deploy, they would not have massive casualties, because the units that are back stateside do not have the proper equipment that is necessary for them to go out and be training, because the best equipment is out there with the forces that are being deployed. We recently learned about, and I wrote on my personal website, alanbwest.com, about how the United States Navy SEALs are having to share their personal weapons. And some people will say, hey, that's no big deal. But I want you to understand, your personal weapon is zero to you. So what ends up happening is these guys are sharing their personal weapons. And what does that mean for the SEAL team member that is not on deployment? Furthermore, they're going out and they're having to buy a lot of their combat gear and equipment, and that's been verified. So we have a decimation of our military force and our capability and capacity. And when you have senior generals that are testifying saying that we are not at a high level of readiness, then Iran hears that, Russia hears that, North Korea hears that, China hears that, and they look at exactly what they're doing all across the globe when they are expanding their military capability and capacities. And we have allies that are confused. They feel abandoned. Recently, the Kurds are looking to go to visit Russia to sit down and talk with them about getting weapons.
It's just simply astonishing. And most of this has occurred. Is this accurate within this last 7 years under President Obama, or did the decline precede that?
No, I think that it has really happened under this current watch, under this current president. The president kept the National Defense Authorization Act. He kept the military hostage so he could get more domestic, spending. So this is not the concern for us to have trained and ready military forces, which his number one title is the commander-in-chief. The number one responsibility of the federal government is to provide for the common defense, not provide welfare.
Absolutely. In fact, there's a question whether the federal government really has a role under the Constitution in providing welfare. But that's a whole other question we won't go into today. But on the subject of, the national defense, I've heard people say, in fact, I told you before the show that my husband's friend, who is ex-military, has been referring to the need to restore the warrior class, and that's warrior class, of U.S. military leaders, referring to people who have been purged or have left the military in the last 7 years, who have more the right stuff idea about what the military's role is. And so we're going to have a new president. Let's hope he has an R by his name in January 2017. What's it going to take? Is the warrior class people that maybe couldn't come back? How do you restore that? And
well,
what do you
let me tell you how this all got started. When I was still on active duty, we had a Lieutenant General Claudia Kennedy. She ended up being appointed in the Army as the Deputy Chief of Staff in the Army for Intelligence, and this was under the Clinton administration. And she talked about how we had to, tone down the rough edges and reduce the warrior ethos in the military. One of the policies that the Clinton administration instituted was called consideration of others training. And this was actually went down to the platoon level size units. You had to sit down and go over vignettes, and you had to talk about feelings and how would you deal with others and their emotions. Now, I was a combat arms artillery guy. We did not have time to sit around and talk about, our emotions and our feelings, especially at a time when we were getting our amount of ammunition cut back, so we could not go out and properly train. But fast forward to today, this is where this has ended up. When you have a guy that's a deserter on the battlefield in Bo Bergdahl,
yes,
and his parents are given a Rose Garden ceremony, but yet you have a young man from right here in the great state of Texas, Army First Lieutenant Clint Lawrence, who is sitting in Fort Leavenworth prison doing 20 years for premeditated murder because he gave an order to engage and kill the enemy that were fastly approaching his patrol position. And, how do we get to this point where we have an administration that praises a deserter, but yet the young man that fights against the enemy is put in prison? And this is the exact same prison where Nadal Hassan sits. So we have to have a sense of American strength, a sense of American exceptionalism that is embodied in the person that's the commander-in-chief to say that I want the military to go out to fight and kill the enemy. When was the last time you heard anyone in our military talking about victory? When was the last time you heard anyone talking about killing the enemy? And we have to get back to that and stop playing with these insidious rules of engagement and political correctness.
I do want to talk about rules of engagement. We have like 4 minutes in this segment, so I hope we can cover it in that time. But because we've talked about this before, and you wrote about it recently too, this concept of rules of engagement. In fact, in one of the presidential debates, there was reference to it also. The basic concept is when you are out serving the country, when can you actually engage someone as an enemy? And the rules tell you when you're allowed to engage or not. Right
now, the rule, and these are still combat theaters of operation. I don't care what the president says, that
Sure.
combat is ended. The current rules are that you cannot fire until you're fired upon. And anyone that has been in a firefight, they know that within 2 to 3 seconds, you give the initiative over to the other side, and you're being in a react mode. And it's all about, making sure and justifying hostile intent. Well, the other side understands now the gaps that they can exploit. When someone is on the side of a road and you're in an Apache helicopter and you see them digging a hole and implanting an IED, they're not allowed to immediately engage that person because they have to show hostile intent. How do you know that that person is planning an IED? And so these are the insidious types of rules of engagement. And you can go back, and there are some things going to Vietnam, but they have been so exacerbated now. Lawyers are running the battlefield, and our men and women on the battlefield are losing their lives because they're not able to engage the enemy. Case in point, General Campbell, who has just stepped down as the commander in Afghanistan, doing a House Armed Services briefing, was asked, General, do you have the permission to engage the Taliban? No, he doesn't. So here is a declared enemy that is fighting us, and we have men and women still there, and we do not have the green light to go on offense against the Taliban.
I mean, every American school kid understands the Taliban is our enemy, and the idea that this guy is saying, I can't engage them. I want to ask you, so these rules of engagement are coming as executive orders, or these are, where are they coming from?
Mostly they come from your judge advocate general, your JAG, your legal representatives, but they are approved at the highest levels. And what I promote is that the rules of engagement should be from the bottom up, not the top down. Because it's the men and women that are there on the ground that are engaged in firefights that understand exactly the tactics, the techniques, and the procedures of the enemy. Just the same as with Clint Lawrence. We know over there that the enemy uses, dirt bikes to come around and recon your positions, and they radio back information. He engaged, 2 to 3 individuals that are on a dirt bike coming toward his position. Now, the Army withheld exculpatory evidence in his case, and they sentenced him to prison. Now, guess what just happened toward the end of last year? 5 to 6 United States Air Force security intel personnel were killed by a Taliban suicide bomber on a motorcycle that drove right up into their position.
We're talking tonight with Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, and fortunately he is going to stay with us through this next break because I want to talk a little bit more about what has to happen when we have a new president in 2017. How is all this corrected? Who can correct it? How is it corrected? How do you even get the people to be inspired to join the military when they understand the things that you're talking about, like we've just been talking about? So don't go anywhere. Quick break. Come back.
Back to Ladies Can We Talk with Debbie Georgatos on 660 AM The Answer.
And welcome back to Ladies Can We Talk. We're so glad tonight we have in studio with us Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, who is currently the Executive Vice President and Vice Chairman of the Board of the National Center for Policy Analysis, also known as America's Think Tank. And he's also, as I think we said before, but he's had a long history in the United States Army. And I'm really trying to dive in and understand how we got to the point that we have rules of engagement that essentially do not allow our own precious American servicemen and women to engage with the enemy without being, unless a person they've been shot at first. It's kind of, you have to wait until you're being shot at before you can shot back, which is it's like suicidal. And so what we were talking about in the break, and I want to talk about now on air, is it seems to me it stems from President Obama's sense that America doesn't really have a rightful place, or America somehow shouldn't be in charge. We're just, it's like, well, you use the expression, it's the enemy seen as unlawful enemy combatant.
Yeah.
But this is a war, and radical Islam is at war against us.
Well, the thing is that the president doesn't define this as a war. As a matter of fact, he's come out unilaterally and declared combat operations is over. But the enemy has not gotten that memo, and they continue to fight us and press us. And you have seen an incredible increase in the activity of militant Islamic jihadism, in these past 7 years, and it's going to get even worse in this last year. It is about not understanding the nature of this battlefield, this 21st century battlefield with unlawful enemy combatants. These are not prisoners of war. They are not part of a dedicated or defined nation state. They don't wear uniforms. They don't openly declare their weapons. So they're not entitled to all of these rights and privileges. And you can look at the Geneva Convention and see that. And so when the president talks about shutting down Guantanamo Bay because it's a recruiting tool for the enemy, look, go back to 1790 when, in Paris, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams sat down with the Dey of Algiers, and they asked him, why are you attacking our merchant shipping? Why are you enslaving our American citizens? Well, the Dey of Algiers didn't say, well, it's because Guantanamo Bay is around. He definitely did not say, well, climate change is really upsetting us along the Barbary Coast, and so that's why we're attacking your shipping. What he said is that we're commanded to do so by our holy book and by our prophet.
We Muslims are commanded to do so.
And that's not saying everybody. But what we must first understand is that there is a theocratic, political, totalitarian ideology that has been fighting against the United States of America and indeed Western civilization for quite some time. And we just are reticent in admitting that. And in doing so, we are providing excuses for the enemy and their behavior, which they clearly state themselves. And we do not articulate this battlefield. And so, therefore, we're very confused in our goals and our objectives. But they're not. Look how long it took for this Obama administration to declare that what is happening under ISIS-held territories is genocide.
It was astonishing and just inexplicable. There is no reason not. I mean, everyone can see this, what it is. I do want to switch gears briefly because the other big thing that's happening, or many big things are happening internationally, but the other one was that Russia kind of unannounced and surprising pulled out of Syria. So what's going on there?
Let me tell you what's happening. Vladimir Putin was very smart. Vladimir Putin learned the lesson of Afghanistan. Do not get bogged down, for decades long with nation building and what have you. Vladimir Putin went in and said, here's my objective. I'm going to make sure that the balance of power is tipped back in favor of Bashar al-Assad. I'm going to make sure that he can stay in power. That's the whole thing. And that is what he has done. Bashar al-Assad, to the chagrin of President Obama, who said he must go. Here's a red line. He's not going anywhere.
Red lines.
So he achieved his short-term goals. He still has this is a partial pullout, not a full pullout. But this is what enabled Vladimir Putin to pull out. The United States of America has given Iran $150 billion So now Iran can look to go to Russia and buy brand new T-90 tanks. Iran can look to go and buy new state-of-the-art fighter aircraft, S-300 surface-to-air missile systems. Iran now has a land bridge from Iran over to Syria because we've ceded that entire country over to them, and they're the hegemony there. But also you have the Quds Force of Iran that's occupying there. And because they have the billions of dollars that we're giving them, Hezbollah, which is a proxy army of Iran, right next door in Lebanon, they're there fighting in support of Bashar al-Assad. So Vladimir Putin came in, did what he had to do. Now he's gone. And let me tell you what he's going to focus on now. He's going to focus on the Ukraine, the Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and Moldova. And because he does not want to have these extended lines of communication, logistical support lines. So now he's very close back in his own territory. And he has, number one, Assad is still in power. Number two, he's got a great ally now in Iran. And number three, guess what? He has now made himself an impact player. Like I said, the Kurds are going to talk to him. Yep. Egypt has gone to talk to him. Before the last General Assembly of the United Nations, Prime Minister Netanyahu went to talk to him. So now he's the king player in the Middle East.
You know, it's astonishing. It just seems like President Putin is or Vladimir Putin is just running circles around the United States, around our president. And, you know, you could get to the point, we've talked about this in previous times, I think, when you've been here or on the breaks too, but I think President Obama's sympathy for Islam in general, I'm not saying he is a Muslim, but his sympathy for Islam and Muslims around the world causes him to put their interests at least on an equal parallel footing with America's interests, if not even more willing to buttress them at the expense of American lives and security.
Well, the president has shown through his policies and his actions that he is sympathetic to Islamists. When you look at how the president responded when Mohammed Morsi became the president of Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, who is the granddaddy of militant jihadism, and now how he has just completely given the Heisman to General El-Sisi, President El-Sisi in Egypt. The president and Hillary Clinton, they destabilized the situation in Libya. So now that's a new base of operations for ISIS, as well as Jabhat al-Nusra, and al-Qaeda in the Maghreb is also conducting operations based out of Libya. So when you look at the destabilization of the Middle East under this president, his policies, where he said he was going to pivot away from the Middle East, it makes no sense. And when you go,
they're not pivoting away from fighting us. Yeah,
they're not pivoting away. And when you have our 10 U.S. Navy sailors on their knees at gunpoint from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, and you have a Secretary of State that thanks the Iranians for taking care of our sailors, something is upside down. This is, I don't know if you remember the Superman comic book series, but it's Bizarro World, where, you know, up is down, right is wrong. It's unconscionable.
So we're going to have a new president in January 2017, and we obviously need to do a major, not just overhaul the military, but a major kind of repositioning of America in the international scene. Who are the top advisors if someone were actually wanting to be a strong America again? Who does a new president look to? Because we don't have any generals running for president.
Well, you got great guys like General Jack Keane, who I served with at Fort Bragg, Ace Lyons, Tom McInerney, the general that Mike Flynn that we will have here speaking for us at NCPA on the 31st of March, former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. You got General Mattis, who is the former head of the U.S. Central Command. General Campbell, who is now retiring from being the head of Afghanistan. And one of the things that we have and we've developed, at NCPA is this Provide for the Common Defense Now petition. And there are 5 points with that petition. The first point is, how do we build a military capacity for the 21st century battlefield? How do we transform our warfighting strategy so that we're talking about winning, our rules of engagement? How do we build up our military force? How do we reform our defense acquisition and procurement system? That's where we're losing so much money, Debbie, with these cost overruns and poor budgeting and tracking of these programs. You know, how do we make sure that we are compensating our young men and women properly? Because I hear everyone, Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, talking about $15 minimum wage. A brand new sailor, soldier, airman, Marines, less than $19,000 coming into the United States military. So they're coming in under the poverty level. They're coming in having to go on government subsistence, and we're not taking care of them in the right way. And then you got to read the other one that I just forgot.
You know what? I don't have it. I just have. I was going to say, folks.
You can go to www.ncpa.org, and you can see those. We have 5 points for that national security strategy, because we're in the development for the fiscal year 2017 National Defense Authorization Act. We want to get 100,000 petitions, signatures on this petition so that I can go up to D.C. and present it to the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Mac Thornberry of Texas, and Senator John McCain, who heads up the Senate Armed Services Committee, and say, gentlemen, we got to get this thing right for our military.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I did. I'll tell our listeners. I went on. It's ncpa.org/petition and sign the petition. Put your name on there because this is, you talk about something you can do. You're not in the military and you cannot, change the way the president functions, but you can send a signal as an American citizen. I want our military strong. I want them engaged in the right things. I want to have Congress and the powers in Washington stand behind our military. So, and I just thrilled. I urge you to go and sign that petition. So we have approximately 30 seconds here. So I guess Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, I want to thank you for coming in. Any last comments about NCPA events coming up? Or?
Well, we do have on the 31st of March at the Hotel Intercontinental up in Addison, retired Lieutenant General Mike Flynn, who is the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Please come and listen to him talk about, this chaotic world in which we are living in and what we need to do to be successful.
Thank you so very much. This is Debbie Georgatos, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, and ladies, can we talk? Come back after our break.